Hello, I've managed to build my first split wireless keyboard, so may I present the Ohaabu Desuwa, which means grass in bourgeois speak. The is a 42-key split wireless keyboard running on ZMK firmware, has a 3D printed case with keys connected using copper wires, is controlled with two super mini NRF 52840 controllers, or may I call them the cheaper Nice Nanos, has 1000 mAh LiPo batteries on each side, 0.91 inch 32 by 128 OLED displays, and is paired with MMD Princess Tactile switches, cloned GMK Jamon cherry keycaps, and has RGB underglow as usual. I've had this idea of making the Ohaabu Desuwa since a long time ago because one of my first mechanical keyboards, the BM40, is an ortholinear 40% keyboard that's small and cute, like Smew. The BM40 is nice and all, but because it's so small, it kind of makes my shoulders stiff and wrists tired when I use it, so I thought it would be so comfortable if the BM40 had a split space and backspace, and if it were a split keyboard. So after a doodle and like a year of having this idea bake in my head, I finally took the time to design the keyboard. The layout itself is a simple 12 column by 4 rows matrix, but I made the thumb space and backspace keys to be 1.25U because I remember I wasn't used to having a 1U key for the thumb keys. As for design, I made the key tilt by 10 degrees so I can fit the battery and control at the back, and also because I find myself having this angle to be the most comfortable angle versus having tented keyboards or having them laid flat. I also made some space for the push button switch, the RGB strips because I remember having wiring issues because they weren't secured properly, and the OLED displays. I think OLED displays are very important for wireless keys like this because I can know which device I'm wirelessly connected to and if I have any connectivity issues between the two halves. After the design, I tackled the most tedious part of building a keyboard, which is making the firmware. While following ZMK's documentation on building the firmware, I realized that my keyboard is just an ortholinear version of a cornet, so I borrowed most of my config from there. However, I couldn't get the OLED and RGB to work, which I later found out should be configured in each half's individual config files instead of having everything in the main config file. Building the ZMK firmware took like a week plus and many fails here and there, but I eventually got it working on my prototype build. So I had my firmware ready and it's time to get my case printed by my usual guy. I asked for a red print this time because when I first bought my BM40, I liked the colorway it had on the product page, which I later found out belonged to a Jamon keycap set. So this time my build is going to be all red, just in time for this year's Chinese New Year. So first we mash in the switches into the switch holes. I had some difficulty with a few of them because of the tight tolerances, so I had to file the switch holes a bit. And for this build, it was my first time using copper wire to wire up the switches, so I followed a lot of these steps from ScottoKeep's video here. So, do the columns, connect the diodes, shrink tube the row wires at the contact points with the column wires, and connect the diodes to the row wire. So the copper wire matrix is complete, and now it's time to put in the OLED and RGB. And then wire the controller to everything. The wiring part took some guesswork to figure out how long each wire should be because there's not much space to have bundles of wires everywhere inside the keyboard. After wiring, it's time to connect the battery and we're done. Well, not quite because I messed up my column pins and a few key switches weren't working and I didn't have mouse keys. So a not so quick correction for the column pins, changing the West YAML file to use Urob's repo for the mouse keys, and resoldering the switches when I finally figured out it was a hardware and not software issue. I finally completed the Ohaabu Desuwa in like a day and a half. And as usual, here's a typing test. By the way, after this I added EVA foam for very negligible clack reduction. I guess you can't really do much on improving typing sounds for 3D print cases. Overall, as usual, I'm happy with my build. The design is simple, it looks cute, doesn't require that much getting used to coming from my other keybobs, but however, does have some connectivity issues at times. I just really like the Jamon keycaps and read everything here. はい、以上です。ご視聴ありがとうございました。